And then I realized that this fear of rejection was actually like holding me back from doing what I wanted to do.
Welcome to the show, Liz. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So let's start with a quick intro. Can you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So it always gets a bit complicated trying to explain, but basically I would describe myself as a branding designer. So I create visual identities and branding for small businesses, but I also do a whole bunch of other things. And I've decided that it all comes under the umbrella of helping small businesses with their branding and marketing. So I do the like done for you services, but then I also have a podcast called Building Your Brand, which is like free content that small business owners can use and learn from. I teach some courses, and then I also do a lot of work with Adobe Express. I'm an ambassador for them, and that sort of fits under the same thing as well. It's like helping small businesses like promote themselves as effectively as possible.
Now, I want to dive straight into your rejection challenge. You set a goal to get 100 rejections over 6 months. That's such a brilliant idea. What inspired you to take on a challenge like this?
Well, so it all came about from a rejection that I had. So I went to a creative conference a couple of years ago and bumped into Chris Do, who probably a lot of people will have heard of. But if you haven't, he is, I guess, like a thought leader, educator in the kind of space of building creative businesses. So he works with lots of creatives. I think his goal is like helping 1 million creatives make money doing what they love. Anyway, I bought his book and I did the classic thing where I like tagged him on Instagram and he replied. And then I thought, oh, you know what? I'm just going to quickly shoot my shot and I'm going to ask him if he'd be on my podcast. And then he asked me how many downloads I had. And I told him and he said, oh, I'm looking for a bigger audience, but like get back in touch with me. And I actually felt it was really interesting to me how I felt. I felt embarrassed that I'd asked him. And I remember it going through my head, oh, this doesn't feel good. I'm not going to ask someone of that kind of level again to be on the podcast. Anyway, so I just sort of like went on with my life and didn't really think about it that much more. But then a few months later, I think I was probably thinking about someone else that I wanted to pitch to be on the podcast. And it sort of came back to me and I thought, oh no, I'm not going to do that. And then I realized that this fear of rejection was actually like holding me back from doing what I wanted to do. And a friend of mine called Katie Chappell, who's an amazing illustrator, had back in, I think, 2019, had done like a no thank you challenge. And so I kind of stole the idea from her. I mean, I think lots of people have done it. There's lots of people on TikTok doing this challenge, but they do it, like in their personal life. So they'll like go out into the street and be like, will you sing a duet with me or something like that? I was like, no, I'm not doing that sort of thing. But I thought in my professional life, this would be a really good thing for me to do. And one of the things that I've learned working for myself is that I respond well to challenges and I'm very sort of like motivated by that sort of thing. So I set myself a challenge to get 100 rejections in 6 months. And yeah, it's kind of been very transformational for me.
I just love that story. And I can totally relate to how personal rejection can feel, especially as a creative entrepreneur, because we put so much of ourselves into our work and it's really hard to separate ourselves from what's being rejected.
Absolutely. Yeah, our creativity and our worth is so often so linked in a kind of unhealthy way. And that is something that I have been working on. But like you say, it's so much of us that goes into the work. It is quite hard to separate the two from each other. So yeah, it's definitely been a journey for sure.
Yeah, totally. So how did you actually get started? Did you create a list of goals or dream projects, or was it more spontaneous for you?
What I did before I even sort of started the challenge was I was like, I'm going to make a list of 100 things I could pitch for, because I kind of wanted to know that there was, I had enough ideas of things to go and pursue. And a lot of them at the time, I was very focused on my podcast. So a lot of them were guests that I wanted to pitch to, sponsors that I wanted to get, me pitching to be on other people's podcasts. There was some like speaking opportunities, work, design opportunities, things like that. So it was a whole mix. And then once I had that list, I was like, okay, great, I'm going to go for it. And then obviously, in inverted commas, everything is content. So I started documenting the process as well and sharing it online as I went. And I made sure that I sort of tracked what I was doing. So I would, every time I pitched for something, I'd put it in this spreadsheet and then I would, write in if it was a rejection or if I got accepted, like if it was, what's the right word? The opposite of being rejected. Yeah, accepted. I documented it. I talked about what I was learning. I sort of shared the process as I went. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to jump straight into the results, but it was quite interesting. It wasn't really what I expected, I guess, what happened.
How is it going so far? Are you still in the middle of it? And, how many rejections have you gathered so far?
So I actually started this challenge like 2 years ago, and it was supposed to be 6 months. And I completely failed the challenge. Like I didn't get anywhere near, not even like remotely close to 100 rejections in 6 months. And there was a few reasons for that. So firstly, people kept saying yes, which was amazing. And I guess like ultimately that was what I was hoping, was that people would say yes to my pitches. And then what also happened was, when people say yes, you then have to sort of fulfill the thing that you've pitched for. And so I was actually really busy because so many people were saying yes. And so I had to really slow down like how much I was pitching for things. So at the moment, I'm at just slightly more rejections than yeses. But for a long time, it was about 50-50, which was an interesting stat. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm still going. I'm not even close still to like 100 rejections.
Really?
I think I've pitched for about maybe like 50 things. So I haven't even pitched for 100 things yet. But because the other interesting thing that happened was, as I started to do it, and I think the process of doing it, I became maybe, I don't know if more visible is the right word, but like more visible, maybe more confident in how I was like showing up online. And I had made a list of, podcasts that I wanted to pitch to be on, and they started asking me before I even got to pitching to them. So I think another factor of it is a lot more opportunities came my way that I didn't even ask for. So yeah, it was like last year was a very busy year. And so basically I just had to extend it. I guess it'll probably just be like a lifelong project that I'm working on. But the process of now just getting into the habit of documenting it all, I'm finding really helpful. Because I think sometimes, like that concept of, 50 people could say something positive about you, and then one person says something negative, and you like fixate on that one negative comment and it takes up all your headspace. I think it's the same with the rejections, like you get this one, you fixate on that. So actually having the cold, hard data in front of me, and actually seeing, oh, actually I'm getting just as many acceptances as rejections is like really helpful. It means that I don't spiral into thinking, oh, it's just all rejection all the time.
That's actually brilliant to have a spreadsheet with all that data in front of you. I think it's so amazing how you were able to turn these really tough moments into something so empowering. How did you actually manage to recognize that feeling of disappointment or even shame and transform it into action, instead of, letting it completely overwhelm you in that moment?
I think I'm always someone like who's quite self-reflective. So I love analyzing like why I feel the way that I do. And I've definitely started to notice like in the past, like the stories that I would tell myself about myself when something, say, like negative happened or someone rejected me or whatever. I guess was trying to work through, is that true? Or is that just this story that I'm now telling myself off the back of this like perceived negative thing? And I think a part of it as well, like the motivation for doing it was born out of the frustration of feeling alone in it. So feeling like I was the only person that was being rejected, when I knew in my like logical brain, I knew that that wasn't true. But it's not the sort of thing that people necessarily talk about online. Like they will occasionally, but you don't really go around, like announcing to the world, oh, I just got rejected. This person doesn't want to work with me. And so a part of it was like wanting to remind myself that actually rejection's just part of the process of running a creative business. Like it's just a given. Like everyone is dealing with it. They're not necessarily talking about it. I guess this is where you get the sort of context collapse on sort of social media, for example, where you're not seeing the full story of any business. You're just sort of seeing a highlight reel. And so I think that really motivated me to want to do something about it, to not just sort of like get lost in my cycle of, oh, well, this thing happened, so this means this about me. I guess it was kind of like a bit like exposure therapy. I was like, the more I get rejected, maybe the easier it will become to deal with. And I don't think I ever went into it thinking, oh, this is going to fix it for me. Because I think it's okay to be disappointed when you get rejected or when something doesn't happen. Like, I think that's part of it as well. So I'm not really trying to get rid of those feelings. It's more getting better at dealing with it, like how I then respond and how I then move forward. So I recover from it a lot quicker now. And I would say that I'm quicker at shutting down the negative stories that my brain starts to tell me when it happens.
That's such an important point of view. And also what you mentioned about feeling so alone with the rejection, when actually it is such a universal feeling. Everyone is just showing the highlight reel of their lives, obviously, on Instagram. So we don't really see that from other people.
Yeah, I think so. And like, that's not to say that you have to like bear everything and every negative thing online. But one of the things that was really nice was in creating content about it and sharing about it was hearing other people's experiences and having that reminder that this is all something that we go through. And then the amazing thing was the number of people that have messaged me being like, oh, I saw you doing your challenge and I decided to pitch for this thing. And they've said yes. And now I'm doing XYZ amazing thing. And it was just so cool. Like some of it was like speaking at, a conference on the other side of the world, working with a dream client, all of these things. And I was just like, how amazing is that if we all like cheer each other on, remind each other that it's okay to sort of like shoot your shot and go for it and ask for what you want. And yeah, you might get rejected, but you'll be okay and you can move on from that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can totally imagine that because you're getting me so inspired about rejection as well at the moment. And I do think that it is so powerful because when you pitch yourself without the fear of rejection, you're really taking control of your life and actively, designing the life that you want instead of just waiting for opportunities to fall into your lap.
Yeah. And don't you think as creatives, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I definitely went through this period, and I don't know if this is like a cultural thing or where it comes from, but it was very much this idea that I just had to sort of like quietly get on with my work and wait for someone to notice. And I just had to work really hard and eventually someone would see it and they'd offer me an opportunity. And I think I had this like revelation where I was like, oh, hang on a minute. A lot of these people that are out there doing the things that I want to do have asked for it. They've sent that email and they've recommended themselves. Because how does anybody know that you want to do something unless you ask them? Like, how does this person know that I would love to interview them on my podcast unless I ask them? All these different kind of things. And so I think it really shifted how I think about that. Like, that actually it's okay to go out and say, I want to do this thing. Would you be interested in working with me? And that's not a bad thing. That's not a negative thing. And it's not an arrogant or ego-driven thing, which I think is something that I'm always like aware of. Like, am I going to come across too like pushy or too full of myself? But I think I'm all for going out and sort of asking for what you want.
Yes, totally. What you said really resonates with me. It seems like there's this feeling that we are not supposed to put ourselves out there. Maybe it's because marketing has such a bad rep among creatives, and it just feels easier to wait for opportunities instead of actively pursuing them, which actually doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And sometimes that does happen and that's great. But yeah, why wait around and be resentful that something hasn't happened when there's positive things that you can do to potentially make it happen?
So I'm curious, what's your relationship with perfectionism? Because personally, I think that perfectionism is one of the best forms of procrastination. And I could definitely imagine that your rejection challenge would help with it, making it less crippling when you give yourself permission to fail.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like I have a funny relationship with perfectionism because it's not very black and white for me. It's a bit sort of confusing in how it shows up in my work. So I would have said that I wasn't a perfectionist. Like, I'm definitely a believer in this idea of like done is better than perfect. And I definitely live that when it comes to like creating content, or, you know, like I try not to overthink it too much. And if it's not like absolutely perfect, I'm still happy to like put it out there. And I thought I wasn't a perfectionist, but I've been working on a project recently where, oh my goodness, I've been giving myself such a hard time if it's not up to the standards that I think it should be. And so I think, yeah, sometimes I do struggle with it, but not in the way that I would expect, maybe. But I think that's it. It's like giving yourself permission to fail does is liberating in the sense that it doesn't have to be perfect. I think so often when it comes to pitching for things, we don't do it because in our heads we're like, oh, well, I haven't written the perfect pitch, or my portfolio is not totally up to date, or, you know, like there's all these excuses that we come up with, and we're always going to be able to find an excuse as to why something might be better. But I think that's almost like a safety tactic, isn't it? So one of the things I realized was if I didn't pitch for it, there was still the potential in my head that that person was going to say yes, because I hadn't asked yet and they hadn't said no. Whereas once they've said no, that feels so final. And so it feels like you've lost the opportunity. So it was almost like I preferred to have the possibility of the opportunity than actually finding out for definite yes or no whether it would happen. So that was one thing that I had to work through. But then the other thing, that lesson that I learned, and I'm sort of veering off from the perfectionism question, but I think often we think that if we get a no, that's the end of the story, like that's it forever. But that, like in some instances, that might be true. But in most instances, you can go away, learn something from the rejection, and you can come back and pitch again. And so I think I've been really trying to get out of my head with that idea. Yeah, it does fit in with the perfectionism thing, you know, like getting out of my head this idea that I can't pitch until it's perfect, instead of thinking I can pitch where I'm at right now. If they say no, I go away, I improve, I work on my proposition, you know, whatever it is that I'm pitching for, and then I come back and I try again. And the thing that really turned that round for me was on my podcast, I interviewed an illustrator called Kyle Webster, and he had a brush company and he sold it to Adobe, and he pitched it to them. I think it was on the third time that they bought his company. And so he actually went back, you know, multiple times to pitch it to them. And then I was just like, oh my goodness, of course, that is totally an option. You know, like, why do we get it into our head that once you've asked for something and someone said no, that's the end of the story?
That is such a good point. I just realized that it never even crossed my mind that we can actually pitch as many times as we like, that we don't have to stop when we quote unquote fail.
That's it. The sort of perceived rejection doesn't have to be the end of the story. And I think it's this whole attitude in business of you can learn from everything. The times that I've made most progress in my business are when I've made a mistake and I've done something wrong. And it's hard. It doesn't feel good, but it's like, oh, okay, this didn't go well. I need to improve this process. And then it improves my business massively. But it's so ingrained in us to think of all of these things as like really negative things. And it comes back to the perfection thing. You know, like we need to be this perfect business. But actually, if we get to the point where we're like making mistakes, getting rejected, is all just part of the sort of messy creative process of running a business. And actually, it's expected. And one of the things that's really been encouraging me recently is, I won't name any names, but I've seen some big brands making some pretty like public mistakes. And like often they're like little things. Like the other day I saw a big brand promoting an event and they put the date wrong on, you know, there was a date on one page and a different date on the other page. That's the sort of thing, that's the sort of mistake that I would totally make in my business. And I would give myself such a hard time about it. And then I was just like, well, everyone's making these sort of mistakes. It's totally fine. You know, like you just learn from them and you double check it next time, and that's okay.
That is so true. And also, often rejections can be blessings in disguise. So maybe losing out on one project actually opens the door to something even better down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is another great lesson that's come out of it. I think we get so fixated in our head about particular things that we can't really imagine that maybe there's something better. Someone, I can't remember who it was that shared it with me, but there's a quote that's something along the lines of rejection is redirection. And so it sends you in a different direction that often is a better path for you. And I think that's another really sort of healthy way to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder how your life might be different now if you hadn't started the whole journey.
I guess it is hard to know, but it's like a bit like sliding doors film, isn't it? I mean, I think it's with any sort of challenge, it moves. I think you learn the lessons quicker because you've set yourself the task to do a lot of something in a smallish time frame. So I did last year with a friend of mine, Hannah, we did a reel challenge where we decided in November we would post a reel every day. And, like nothing big happened. I didn't go viral. I didn't get loads of followers or anything like that. But it sped up my process of improving making videos because I was just doing a higher quantity of videos in this like intense, smaller period. And so actually that was really beneficial because I got really comfortable making videos for my like marketing. And I think that's the same with the rejection challenge. Like it's just sped up the process. I probably would have learned these lessons slowly over the next 5 years, but because I set it as a challenge, I sped up that process of learning the lessons because I was just doing it so often in a small amount of time.
That is so brilliant. And I mean, you learn so much from failure. That's the best way to learn, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think you learn more from failure and things going wrong than when things go right.
Yes, absolutely. So looking back, do you feel you achieved what you set out to do?
Yeah, I think so. Like what was really interesting to me was the minute I set the challenge, it was like my mindset changed overnight. I thought it was going to be a gradual thing, but actually it happened pretty much straight away because I'd created for myself a win-win situation. If I got rejected, like actually that was fine because I could just add it to my list and it was getting me closer to my goal. If I got accepted, then that was great too because it was like giving me confidence and it was helping me move my business forward. Yeah, I definitely feel like I achieved what I went into it to achieve. And like, as I said before, it's not like I never feel anything negative, right? It's not like I don't feel a bit disappointed if I get rejected. But I think in the past, potentially I would have spiraled for a couple of days or a couple of weeks about a rejection. Whereas now I might, feel a bit rubbish about it for a few hours, but then I just move on to the next thing. And so in that sense, it's absolutely achieved what I wanted to achieve. I do sometimes feel it creeping back in. So like recently I was thinking about pitching to someone to be on the podcast and I was like, oh no, maybe I should wait until this, or maybe, I shouldn't ask them because what if they say no and then I can't ask them again? And so I think it's going to be like a continual, like reminding myself of the lessons. But I mean, I've just learned so much from the process and so many positive things have come out of it. Yeah, it has been amazing.
For sure. And I love how your story began with you pitching your podcast to Chris Do. And I would love for you to share what happened after you started the rejection challenge.
So at the beginning, when I was talking about it, I never said that it was him that rejected me. I would like talk about what happened, but not say it was him. Well, and then basically I thought, I know, I'm going to pitch this back to him and be like, look, this is what's happened off the back of you saying no to me. This is what I've learned in the process. Could I come onto your podcast? And he didn't reply for ages. And so I was like, oh, another rejection. But I was kind of like, that's fine. And then like, I think it was about 4 or 5 months later, I got an email from his podcast producer who was like, yeah, great, come on. Chris really likes the idea of this story. So I went onto his podcast and he has 2.5 million subscribers on Instagram, not on Instagram, on YouTube, and I think he's nearly up to 1 million on Instagram. And so we had an amazing conversation. It was really fun. Like I chatted through the process with him and what I'd learned, and we went on some really fun tangents talking about it. And actually, that ended up being so much better for me than him going on my podcast. So it was like a really nice sort of full circle, and I think he got a kick out of the like how a throwaway DM of him, him just having good boundaries, because I'm sure he gets asked to be on podcasts all the time. So he's got to be selective about what he does, but how that sort of spun off this whole challenge. And I actually saw him last week, and he said to me that he'd had really good feedback, like people really loved the podcast episode. And I think just because it's something that's so relatable, like it's something that everybody goes through, and like we talked about at the beginning, it does feel a bit lonely and isolating because it doesn't feel like the sort of thing you can really, it's not considered professional. It doesn't feel like the sort of thing you can talk about that much.
Yeah, that is so true. But to actually become a professional, you have to fail so many times. It's just an essential part of the process.
Yeah, definitely.
But I really love your story. It definitely came full circle with you and Chris. So as you know, I'm really interested in the decisions that shape people's lives. And I think your rejection challenge is such a brilliant example of this. So I would love to hear if there are any other key decisions that have really influenced your career.
Yeah, I would definitely say starting a podcast has had a huge impact on my career. I kind of didn't go into it with like much strategy. It was just something that I thought that I would enjoy. And I actually did a skills swap with my podcast editor. This is like during COVID times. And she was like, look, I need new branding. You want to start a podcast. How about we do a skills swap and you can try it out and see if you like it? And I was like, oh yeah, perfect. That sounds like a great low risk kind of thing to do. And yeah, I just went for it, completely got the bug. I'm now up to, I think I'm on 145 episodes.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
And I've interviewed like some absolute like sort of professional idols of mine, like people that I've looked up to for decades in my career. And one of the things that I didn't really anticipate is how amazing podcasting is for networking. So just for like connecting with people. And actually, if you have an hour-long conversation with someone, like you get to know them, you build up a relationship with them, and that relationship can then continue beyond the podcast. And so a lot of my podcast guests have become friends, or, like I sort of chat to them semi-regularly. They might recommend me for things, or there's that sort of just like ongoing relationship. And so it's just expanded my network. Like I would never have thought of podcasting as being networking, right? But it has just expanded my sort of circle of people in a way that I didn't expect. And just given me a lot of opportunities that I wouldn't have expected either. So I think, that has been hugely positive for me. And I just really love it. Like I love chatting to people and learning from them. And I sort of manage my podcast in a very selfish way where if there's a gap in my knowledge about something, I'm like, right, I want to learn about this. All right, I'll go and find the person who can come on and talk to me about it. And I hope that what I do is ask the questions that everybody else would want to ask as well. And it's worked out really, really well for me.
So did you encounter any unexpected challenges when you started your podcast, or was it just easy straight from the beginning?
Well, you're probably finding this as well, but it's a lot of work. So I think that was the challenge. Like right from the beginning, I was outsourcing the editing. So I wasn't doing that aspect of it. But I mainly have guests on my podcast. So there's a lot of admin. And again, you'll know what this is like, like managing, just meeting up with them, making sure they've got all the information that they need, like the prep, like researching them, getting the questions together, all that kind of thing. So there is a lot of work. But for me, because I enjoy it so much, it doesn't feel too much like, hard work. I think outsourcing has definitely helped me be consistent because I work really well if I have a deadline. And because I've got a podcast editor, I have to get her the content by a particular date. Like I've been doing it for, I think, 3 years now. And like for most of that time, releasing weekly episodes. So I think the challenge is definitely the work. I've definitely had to improve as an interviewer. Some guests are easier to interview than others. And so I think, like you have to develop a whole bunch of skills in terms of, asking the right questions, putting people at ease, like helping them feel comfortable to sort of chat quite naturally, all these different things. Yeah. So it's hard work, but I enjoy it and the benefits have been huge. So it's worth it to me to keep going. I mean, it doesn't really make me money. I occasionally have sponsors. My aim with it is to make it cost neutral. So where like the sponsors cover, like the editing costs and things like that. So it's definitely sort of a passion project, but the benefits, like the non-financial benefits and the relationships that I've built up make it worth it, financially. It's like a good investment for my business, I would say.
I totally agree with you. And it is so true that the learning curve is really steep. But it is also really rewarding to discover everything that comes with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what advice would you give to someone who's considering starting their own podcast? What do you wish that you have known earlier when you started?
Ooh, good question. Okay, so one of the things that I love about podcasting is that you can actually start very affordably. Like, you don't have to have lots of tech, or you don't have to have lots of things to get started. And so I would absolutely recommend that people give it a go, because even if you decide it's not for you and you don't want to keep it up, podcast content is evergreen. And so, you could do a series of 12 episodes and it sits there on, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And, maybe you decide you don't want to keep it going, but that's still valuable content that's out there that you've created. So I think it's one of those things that are worth trying to see if it's something that you enjoy. The thing that I wish that I had done from the beginning was host my podcast on a platform that has decent stats, because I started off hosting it on Squarespace. And Squarespace, I love Squarespace and it's got lots of good things about it, but it's not really designed to host podcasts. You can do it, but that's not its like main purpose. And so I wish I'd started off on something else where I could get, like the really sort of good stats right from the start. So that would be my lesson to learn from my mistake. But I think it's one of those things, and this comes back to your sort of perfection question, where you feel like you have to wait until you're good at something before you do it. And I think you just have to stop overthinking it and get started and just trust the process, like accept that you're going to learn as you go, and your 145th episode is going to be better than your first episode. And that's okay. If people like are remotely thinking, oh, I think I'd enjoy that, I would really encourage people to go for it. And yeah, it's been amazing for me, but it's not for everybody. And I don't think everybody should feel like they have to start a podcast. Like, I don't know what you think. I think there's so much pressure online. There's so many shoulds. Oh, you should do this. Oh, you should do this. And I think ultimately, if you are a one-person business or you have a small business, like, you can't do it all. So you have to find the things that you love. So I love podcasting, so I invest a lot of my time in that. And there's other areas of my marketing that get neglected because I don't have the capacity for them.
Yeah, I mean, that is so true. And it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint. I actually heard this crazy statistic somewhere that 90% of all podcasts don't make it past episode 3. And of the 10% that do, 90% don't make it past the episode 20. So basically, if you reach episode 21, you're in the top 1%, which is crazy.
I love that stat, because I think there's a lesson in that, which is that sometimes it's not about being the best at something. It's just about showing up and keeping going, because other people won't. And so actually you've created, like you said, you're in the top 1% because you kept going with something. Yeah, that's one of my favorite stats of all time. I mean, it's wild. It is wild.
I really love it as well. And it is so inspiring because you can't be perfect when you get started with something. You just have to get on with it. And then you just learn by doing.
Yeah. Did it take you a while to feel ready to do it, or did you just decide to go for it?
Well, I think it took me around half a year, maybe even longer, from the original idea to actually getting started with a podcast. But at some point, I just realized that I had to get started with it because I could come up with so many excuses, like having a Finnish accent or a bunch of other reasons why I shouldn't do it or why I wouldn't be good enough to be a podcast host. But I guess I eventually recognized that they were just excuses, that I don't have to be perfect. I can just, learn along the way. And that realization was actually huge for me. And it is such a good way to overcome perfectionism and just put myself out there.
Yeah, just like making yourself do it. And yeah, you just have to get over the perfectionism, don't you? But isn't it amazing? I think that's like another universal thing. Well, maybe not universal, but I think so many people struggle with that, where we talk ourselves out of things. There's like so many reasons that you can come up with to talk yourself out of this thing, even though you really want to do it.
Yes. And it's actually so liberating when you just get started and you realize that you're learning so much because, again, we go back to the same theme of failure and rejection, but because you fail, you learn and then you grow. I mean, that's how it works.
Yeah. And I wonder how we get to a point where we don't feel like we can do that anymore. Like one of the things that I did talk about with the rejection challenge is that there is a certain privilege, I think, of being able to do something like that. You know, like I guess I have certain level of safety that means I can take risks in my business and I can, like pitch for something and it's not the end of the world if it doesn't happen. Whereas I think for other people, it's not necessarily like that. But it's interesting how we do get it into our heads, like that failure and mistakes and all of these things are just so, we perceive them to be so negative and so like we're so afraid of them. And that is why I really wanted to share about it so much, because I want people to be able to be in a position where they can be like, oh, I'm just expecting things to go, I'm expecting this. I'm expecting that something will go wrong. I'll make a mistake. Someone's going to say no. And that doesn't mean that I'm bad at what I do. It doesn't mean, we come back to the sort of linking our self-worth to our work. Like it doesn't mean that I'm not worthy. It doesn't mean that I can't do this. It just means I have an opportunity to learn and improve. And that's part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is so valuable how you were able to reframe the whole concept of rejection in your challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't know if you found this, but like for me, I was really surprised when I started running my own business, how much work I had to do, like on my mindset, I guess, on like how I think about things mentally. Like I feel like it's been so exposing, like it's almost been like therapy because I can't hide away from, I guess, the things that I'm good at and the things that I'm bad at. Like I just have to deal with the fact that this is who I am and this is like this impacts my business. And so I feel like I've had to really be confronted by a lot of those things and then work through them, reframe them, like work on my mindset, which sounds so wishy-washy when you say it like that. But it's been very sort of exposing to me running my own business.
Yeah, but it is so true that as a business owner, it is so important to understand yourself and how your mind works, because that's essentially what you have, what you're working with.
Yeah, totally. And I guess the more information you have, the better decisions you can make. I know I'm weak in this area, so I'm going to get support and help. Or I know that this is my strength, so I'm going to lean into that and do more of that. And yeah, I think that you do have to have a certain level of self-awareness, don't you, running your own business?
Yeah, absolutely. It is so important. So you actually mentioned earlier that you started working for yourself after having kids. What prompted that decision then?
Oh, yeah, I guess that would be another big thing that sort of changed my career. So I studied graphic design at university, and a lot of people on my course, their goal was to like run their own business or own their own agency. And I never had that ambition. Like the thought of working for myself was never particularly appealing to me. And so I went and worked for an agency, and then I worked in-house and sort of was quite happily kind of ticking along doing those things. And then I had kids, and I mean, everyone has like different feelings on this, and I don't think there's any right or wrong particularly, but I really wanted to like spend a decent amount of time with my kids when they were younger. And so going back to my 9-to-5 job just didn't feel like the right choice for me. And at this point, I'd started doing some freelance work alongside my full-time job, which not with much like forethought. It wasn't like, oh, I know I want to do this down the line. It was more just like, oh, some people have asked me to do freelance work for them. Maybe I'll, start taking that on and like building my own thing and see what happens. But anyway, I had kids and decided I didn't want to go back to my 9-to-5, and that it made sense for me to sort of build up my business and work for myself so that I had flexibility. It means that I can scale back my client work in the summer when they're on summer holidays, and think, it means that I don't have to ask permission to take time out in the day to take one of my kids to the doctor, or if I want to, whatever it is, like I'm in control of my schedule. And yeah, I mean, it's been the best decision for me. And I think I was kind of coasting along a little bit when I was working 9-to-5. But since having kids, I've been so ambitious in my career because I guess it's like my thing that I'm building, and it's my thing, and it's like supports our family. And so, yeah, having kids has really motivated me to push myself, to grow my business, like to make it something sustainable, something that can continue to support us. And I've really enjoyed that challenge. And I think I've pushed myself in a way that I didn't before when I worked for someone else.
That is so fascinating to hear. And I think, especially for women, there's often a fear that having kids will hinder career development. And it is truly inspiring to hear that for you, it was actually quite the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, it did hinder my career development for a bit, in the sense that there was, while I was having kids, there was sort of like probably 4 or 5 years where I had to massively scale back what I could do. And I was doing very sort of minimal amounts of work. I was almost just like keeping my business ticking over at a very like low level. And at the time, watching a lot of my friends have lots of successes and like really push forward in their careers and their businesses, like it was hard, because it did feel a little bit like I was being left behind, which on reflection, I don't think that is true. Like that isn't what was happening. And I was always very clear that that was the decision. Like I made the decision, like I wanted to have kids and I wanted to stay at home with them. And so I totally accepted that. But yeah, since then, as they've got a bit older and I've been able to dedicate more time to my business, it has pushed my career forward in a way that I could never have imagined, which I'm very grateful for.
So I'm curious, how did you actually juggle parenting with freelance work when your kids were little?
My kids didn't go into childcare until they were quite a bit older, but we live quite near my parents, so they helped out a lot. So basically, I would have sort of designated slots in the week where I would work. That was kind of how I did it in the early days. Now it's a lot easier because my husband's actually self-employed as well. So we've sort of very evenly split sort of like childcare and work between us. So that makes it easier. I mean, it's never like, there's pros and cons, right? One of the things that I do really struggle with currently is I find it very hard to switch off from my business. When I did a 9 to 5, I mentally found it so much easier to, like, the end of the day, I would just switch off from work and I wouldn't really think about it until I went back in the next day. Whereas now it's more all consuming because it's, again, it's my thing. I feel really passionately about it. I want to do a really good job. I think one of the things that I struggle with is I get into quite bad habits of like working a lot of evenings, because obviously that's, the kids go to bed and then that's sort of one of the time slots that I've got. So I think finding the right balance of just, like how much time I spend on everything is tricky. But on the most part, like it's just totally the right decision for me and I'm really happy about it. But it is a juggle, and like one of the things is if my kids are sick, I can't, like, I just have to deal with, I mean, I have like very lovely, understanding clients, but I have to deal with the fact that I'm the only person in my business. And it's not like I can just hand it to a colleague to do, because I've got to take time off to look after my kids. So that, there's lots of things like that. There's pros and cons to working for someone else and working for yourself. So I think, yeah, I'm just constantly working through trying to have a healthy work life. What I think people have started to call it a work-life blend. Trying to have a work-life blend, because I'm not sure if there is a balance.
I love it. I'm going to start using that because personally, I think that achieving work-life balance is so hard, especially as a creative entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So it definitely sounds like you have a lot on your plate all the time. So how do you manage your time between podcasting, your freelance work, and your personal life?
Yeah, not very well sometimes. I definitely say yes to too many things, and it's something that I'm currently working on. I mean, if I've had particularly busy periods, like I try to scale back how much work I've got on and have a slightly more chilled period. Like me and my husband do laugh about the number of times that I'm like, I just have to get through this week and then next week will be more chill. And he's like, yeah, right. But like, I do feel like I have a balance or a blend, in the sense that, I can take time off in the day to like go to their performance at school. Like I sort of make the most of the fact that I have that flexibility. I think it's something that I'm always going to be working on, trying to get the balance or the blend a bit better.
Same, me too, for sure. Now, we've been talking about rejection, but I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on success. So how do you define success for you, and how has the definition changed for you after becoming a parent?
That is such a good question. I think it's so interesting. But like one of the things that I've really struggled with is getting sucked into all the noise online about what success looks like. So I look at what everyone else is doing around me and I think, oh, okay, well, if I'm not earning that amount of money, then I don't have a successful business. Or if I am not at this event, I'm not a success yet. I think I've often been very influenced by what other people think success is for me. I think having kids, success for me is having that flexibility of being able to spend plenty of time with them and also running a business that creatively fulfills me. And I'm doing that. And so in that sense, I feel like I am successful and my business might not look as impressive on paper as other people's do, but it is sort of fulfilling my goals of how I want to live my life. So I'm very happy about that. So yeah, I think having kids has definitely changed my perspective on what success looks like. Like for me, a huge thing is that flexibility. And the fact that I have that, like that in my head deems me successful because I have sort of built the life that I want with this like freelance or self-employed career that I've got. But I think it's one of those ones that I think I'll always be working on because I do regularly find myself sucked into, oh, well, I'm not having, like 6-figure months or I don't know, whatever the latest crazy thing that someone online is like talking about. I have to really catch myself from not getting sucked in to all of that. And I think, it's good to try things and work out if they're right for you. Like one of the examples I can give is I saw an online business owner who would take the whole of August off her business completely. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. Like that's what I should be working towards. And I tried it and I realized that actually I love scaling back my workload in the summer, but I love doing like bits on my business and creative work. And it's often when I'm feeling like the most inspired. So what I realized is like taking the summer off client work was really good for me, but not taking the summer off my business completely. Like that wasn't what I wanted to do. And I think sometimes you just have to try these things to work out like what it is that works for you. And it's often, I think there is a lot of like shoulds that we get into our head based on what we see other people doing. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to take the summer off because like great for her. It works so well for her. And, that is her goal. But it's okay to sort of be like, oh, I tried this thing and that's not for me. So I'm just going to, tweak it and work out what is right for me.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I think it's so important to define success for ourselves, because otherwise we end up building our lives according to other people's definition of success.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time, although there's so much more that I could ask. Before we wrap up, what key takeaway would you hope our listeners to gain from today's chat?
I think definitely that failure and rejection doesn't have to be this really negative thing, that everybody's going through it. And I would just love people to come away with that changed mindset of this is just part of the process and that's absolutely okay. And it's what you do with it that's important. Yeah, you can feel disappointed and upset and that's absolutely valid. But it's like what you do next that will sort of have the biggest impact on how you grow in your business.
I love it. And where can people learn more about you and your work online?
So you can find my website at lizmosley.net. You can find me on social media. I'm at Liz M. Mosley. And then you can check out my podcast, which is called Building Your Brand. And the website for that is buildingyourbrand.net.
Thank you so much. I will definitely add all these links to the show notes. Thank you so much, Liz, for being my guest today. It was amazing to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've loved it.